So, most people go their entire lives without ever taking the time to seriously ask themselves meaningful questions, let alone answer them. And what I mean by that is that most people spend their lives without any form of self reflection. And so, in this video, I want to discuss the importance of having a self dialogue. So, for much of my life, especially when I was growing up, I was not a very self aware person. I had lots of bad habits, such as anger issues. I was forgetful. I would often ignore people if I was looking at my phone. They'd be talking to me and I wouldn't even hear them. All sorts of other bad habits and character flaws like that. So, what happens with most people is that they develop those character traits, those personality traits that aren't necessarily favorable, and they simply just accept them as they are, and they never do any serious digging into themselves to see why exactly they're behaving the way that they are. And instead, they just play the victim card and blame the circumstances around them, or they blame other people. A good example of this is, you know, in regards to my anger issues when I was growing up, I would just blow up at my family if they were, annoying me or pestering me. Specifically, my siblings, if they were trying to get my attention, I would just lock the door and try to keep them out, and then I would just build it up inside of me until I would just scream at them, and this would just repeat over and over again. And I never really took the time to ask myself, why is it that them trying to get the attention that they're looking for is angering me so much? So I never bothered to ask that. And this is where self reflection would have been very useful. And it wasn't until I started self reflecting, mainly by necessity. Uh, a lot of trauma it occurred while I was in my senior year of high school. And shortly after that, after I graduated, I had a full on mental breakdown. And so I was fully forced into self reflection and really analyzing myself if I wanted to actually have any sort of meaningful recovery. And so, one of the major things that helped me to not just overcome my anger issues, but also to recover from the mental breakdown itself, which happened in 2018, which took over about 6 months, where I was hospitalized 3 times for a total of, I believe, 40 days, uh, was self reflection, having a self dialogue. And the reason I call it a self dialogue is because sometimes self reflection can be a very abstract term for people. It can be a little bit hard to access and hard to wrap your head around. Like, self reflection, what are you uh, looking at yourself in the mirror? Like, what good does that do? It's like, yeah, I see myself in the mirror. Okay, cool. A self dialogue is a little bit more concrete and obvious. It's like you are having a dialogue with yourself. You are asking yourself questions and giving those questions meaningful answers to the best of your ability. And this is the essence of self-reflection, I believe, is having that self-dialogue. And so what that might look like is you simply pull out a piece of paper, you're dealing with some site, you're dealing with some sort of trouble in your life, and the solution has been eluding you, and no matter how much you think about it, you just can't seem to pin it down and figure out how this could be solved or why it's happening in the first place. And so the reason why that is because there's only so much that we can do inside our heads when we are still internalizing all of this. And so self dialogue is most effective when you externalize your thoughts. You put them down on a piece of paper where you can see them and respond to them. As long as they stay up here, we are caught in repetitive thought patterns and loops without really realizing it because our minds are fairly erratic and a little bit hard to control, hence why things like meditation are so popular and helpful. Because our minds, they have a tendency to wander, and so what might take you 20 minutes to kind of mull over in your mind could easily have been accomplished in just a few minutes by writing it down. So, that is really the essence of self dialogue, is simply asking yourself questions and then doing your best to answer them. And so, as I illustrated earlier in the video, this has been tremendously helpful in my own life. And it is something that I highly recommend to anyone who is dealing with any type of issues in their life, especially personal issues regarding who you are as an individual, the way that you interact with the world, the way that you talk to yourself, like your own self-talk. Like sometimes this is a little bit different from self-dialogue, but just the critical voice in our head that just about everybody has, like, oh, you're not good enough, you're this, or I mean, usually it's not second person. It's often, I'm not good enough, I'm a failure, or I'm an idiot. And writing that down and actually analyzing it and asking yourself, is this true? Am I actually an idiot? Am I actually a failure? Can be tremendously helpful. So, hopefully, this video has been useful to some of you, and I highly recommend that you engage in self dialogue as often as you feel necessary. If you're really struggling, I would say to commit to every single day, probably in the evening. It's a good time to do self dialogue. It's a good time to do journaling where you can actually write it down and digest the events of the day. It's not something that I often do in the morning just because I'm trying to focus on the day ahead and prepare for that. And self dialogue can be a good winding down practice at the end of a busy day. So, with that being said, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Comment down below if you have any thoughts on self-dialogue, and make sure to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos. I will see you guys later.